Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
My God, it's full of stars.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Godzilla. That's good. And as always, I'm joined by Julian. Julian, how are you doing? You okay?
I'm doing quite fine. I don't have anything clever to say.
No.
What about you?
No, I'm good. I'm good. Yeah, it's not too bad. I'm not sure how this conversation is going to go. But we're going to be doing. I'm not going to try and do the Japanese Godzilla no Gagushu or Godzilla Raids Again, the sequel to Godzilla from 1955, and the introduction of Godzilla fighting another monster. And yeah,
The introduction of Anguirus.
yeah, yeah, and yeah. Let's to give a quick summary, because this is called, right, this is the thing. This film is called Godzilla Raids Again, right? So the suggestion being that Godzilla is on the rampage and is a major threat to, you know, in this film, Osaka. However, basically, this film is sort of just Godzilla has a new Godzilla, so they're actually a species. It's determined. But Godzilla has a bit of a rumble with another big monster, goes home, people follow him and bomb the crap out of him. Appears to basically be the plot to this film.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, and this is, I mean, it would be a while before, because I was sort of studying this in preparation. It would be a while before Godzilla would become a hero.
Yeah.
But so this is not considered one of those films. He's still a bad guy. He's just more interested in, you know, killing this new monster than he is, you know, trashing cities. He seems more, you know, he's like a, you know, Cthulhu. He doesn't care about the humans one way or another.
No, yeah, this is it. Like, he's completely, you know, and that shows, like, you know, they have to have a reason for him to be going to the city. It's not like he's angry with the people. It turns out he is attracted to lights. And I love the justification they give for this. Like, out of nowhere, one of the professors says it's possible that this gives him flashbacks to the detonation of the atom bomb.
Well, I mean, which is weird because, I mean, like, this is literally not Godzilla, right? I mean, you mentioned how Godzilla Raids Again. This is Godzilla 2, right? We're already in, you know, this is Godzilla's cousin or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
I'm reminded of reading, like, Marvel Universe and going, like, yeah, okay, technically that was the Hate Pirate 2, you know? Yeah, so, I mean, technically Godzilla Raids Again. This is like Godzilla's cousin gets mad. You know, or Godzilla's cousin fights another monster you haven't seen before.
Yeah, literally, like, yeah, and they acknowledge, and that's the thing with because, you know, let's go back. We obviously discussed Godzilla 1954, and one of the key things from that is Godzilla is beaten. They have the oxygen destroyer, and it dissolves Godzilla, and his body is left at the bottom of the ocean. It's a pretty definitive ending for that version of Godzilla. And so, yeah, they had to create one. So, I mean, my question then is, so is every version of Godzilla going forward this Godzilla? Because the next one does have him coming out of the ice. He is thawed and comes out of the ice. So, yeah, does that mean that every Godzilla going forward is actually this Godzilla, not the original Godzilla?
Yes, that's right. I've looked this up. Yes, that's true. Until they reboot the franchise, in
Yeah.
like 84 or 85. Um, yeah. All of, this whole Showa era Godzilla is all the Godzilla 2.
Mm. Godzilla 2, Electric Boogaloo. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was interesting just to see that, like, the acknowledgement of, like, this isn't the Godzilla we watched like a year before or whatever. Like, it was just interesting. And again, like, I'm not entirely sure of his origin. They appear to have stuck with this thing of him being, because originally it was like a T-Rex, or they were saying like it's a T-Rex that's irradiated or something. I can't really remember.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really matter. But I mean, I like
Yeah.
what you said about, like, pointed out the lights, like how the lights, there's this excuse that it's like, right, Godzilla's got PTSD from the atomic bomb testing, and this is setting him off. Like, it's such a bizarre explanation. And I know we don't have Mothra yet, because you could say, well, a moth is attracted to the light. But I guess it's like the same explosion then, created both Godzillas, right? I mean, I don't know. Obviously, like, you're not supposed to think about it too much.
No.
Yeah.
No, and like you say, because when it comes to Anguirus or Anguirus, the justification there is no atomic bomb or anything. It's just no, this is a dinosaur.
Yeah.
And they literally read from a textbook, and it's like they were aggressive, and they were this, and they were that, and they're like, wow, paleontology was very progressive in the 50s.
Yeah, I thought about that too, right? Like, how do you know the personalities of these dinosaurs, right?
Yeah.
And they literally just flip through a book of dinosaurs until they find the one that you saw. And it's like, right,
That's the
here's
one.
his personality, known to enjoy British sitcoms,
Yeah.
That is so bizarre. Right, and as you point out, no explanation for that. And the Godzilla's, I mean, I was very disappointed in this film, but the Godzilla series will go down this route of, screw it, like, he's just a dinosaur. I mean, it's going to have aliens, I mean, it's Marvel movie, right? Where just like, throw it all in, right? Like, Iron Man should not exist in the same universe as Doctor Strange. That is just absolutely incoherent.
Yeah.
They're gods and mysticism, and there's also, sci-fi stuff you're supposed to take seriously. No, these are not the same effing universe, right? But, Godzilla was an example of, just throw it all in, right?
Yes.
There's no way you could take seriously the metaphor of the atomic bomb in the first Godzilla in a universe with, right, that's a metaphor that unleashed horror. But there were also like 20 other horrors beneath the ocean that were going to get unleashed anyway, not to mention all those aliens that were visiting us. So maybe don't beat yourself up about the atomic blast.
Yeah, and time travel. Don't forget there's going to be time travel as well. When we get to Ghidorah and everything, and robots and and King Kong. Yeah, they throw it all in. You're right, they do. They throw it all in. But you mentioned obviously about when we talked about Godzilla before. Obviously, the metaphor there for being the impact of the war and the dropping of the atomic weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and how they were dealing with that, and how Godzilla sort of represented that nuclear power and that nuclear sort of thing, and the fear of it and stuff, and how that was portrayed in the film. And it was very strong. It was very obvious. He was in this though. There were several occasions. There's nothing there that this doesn't have that same thing.
I like that soft pivot, right? Like, you're making the case for Godzilla, and then you just sort of pause and say, in this though, and I'm thinking, like, that's the nicest pivot you could make, right? Like,
well, I was looking for that. I was looking for this imagery or this sort of like metaphor or something. I was like, okay, let's see what are we going to get. And however, there was only one image that, and this might not even be relevant to the Japanese. I don't know. But there's an image where they're shutting down the city. You know, they're saying, right, basically, got to turn off all the lights. So all the lights are getting switched off, and you see sort of Osaka sort of going dark. And then you see these planes, sort of like these military planes flying over the top. And this fear, you've got this fear that you don't want to attract attention, so you turn off the lights. So for me, again, I was thinking, thinking World War II and thinking the Blitz and this thing of sort of trying to stay hidden during these bombings and stuff like that. So also, is that something that's there, or am I sort of overlaying that sort of like in a am I overlaying that?
That's definitely there. It's just that, for that to work beyond like a little corollary, right?
Yeah.
Movies have these little corollaries. Anytime that you are shutting down a city, it is probably going to remind you of the Blitz. It's probably, and obviously, we, America basically leveled Japan. I mean, we bombed the hell out of Japan. And in fact, the nuclear bombs, while psychologically damaging, and we saw in Godzilla, killed far less people than, leveling Japan. So with conventional weaponry. So, I don't think that there's any way to do that without that being a corollary. And I think that corollary is intended. But the problem is there's no deeper reading attached to it, right? Like in the first one, all of the devastation. I mean, I think what I find most missing here is that sense of devastation, is that sense of visual poetry. That first one, this is Toho made this. Toho was literally making this while they were doing Seven Samurai and doing all these Kurosawa movies. I mean, literally, it's the same company. It's like down the street. They're doing these like, amazing. All the Kurosawa stuff was with Toho. So, and then there's a guy. Like Kurosawa saw a guy in a foam rubber suit. And it was just like, that's the other movie. So, I mean, there was a sense of visual poetry in that first one, and here there's no deeper metaphor. It's and that sense of visual poetry is lost. And you're right about that corollary, but it's just there's nothing beyond that. You scratch that surface and it just
falls apart,
fades away. Yeah,
it's true. And this is the thing. I was looking for things. So watching this, I was looking for those things. So, for example, I was like, okay, this is about the fishing industry. This is about is this about overfishing? Is it about? No, we hadn't quite got to that point in the 50s, so it's not about that.
Probably about the fucking French taking your fish.
Yeah, this was a British film. That's it. Like, Godzilla would represent the French stealing our fish. But or Brexit, actually, Godzilla would represent the entire of Europe and and how we've defeated him.
You probably waltz into London and grab a monument and eat it like a baguette. Just the cement things.
Yeah, we're not subtle when it comes to that. But in this, I was looking for this. So I was looking at the sort of the industry they're in, and the sort of this thing. Okay, you're going to mention this. Is Anguirus? Is this battle between Godzilla and Anguirus going to sort of result in anything? Is anything in particular going to be destroyed? There's prisoners that escape that cause the fire that actually attract Godzilla back to the mainland. I'm looking at this and going, right, are they reaching for anything? And you're right, like they are not reaching for anything in this. Like it's there. This feels like a cash grab.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
I mean, that whole sequence with the prisoners escaping is interesting. It's fascinating, right? Like there are these implications of an attack, right? Of shutting a city down. Okay, that's interesting. But you think, why did you, release these prisoners? I mean, it's not really clear. And then we're focusing on them. That takes us away from, the main characters, so to speak. and it's really just an excuse for, like, I mean, a truck could have
Yeah.
could have just collided with something and caused these explosions, and you'd get to the same place. There's nothing special about it. It's very flat, and I was thinking that it strikes me as, like, we've talked a lot about franchises. I think both of us are fascinated by franchises and shared universes and how you manage them. This feels to me like, I mean, it's not full on, cheesy Godzilla from in the future. There's a big gap between this one and the next one, but
Yes.
this does feel like it has. Normally, when you get a sequel, it's a lot closer to the first one than this is. This feels like 3 movies down the line when it's already like, yeah, what people just want is Rambo killing people. Let's just go for that. This is just like somebody looked at the first Godzilla and said, right, people want to see a guy in a suit trashing things. Let's give him someone to fight. What more could they want?
Well, this is the thing. I actually refer to that as the Homer effect. I actually have a name for this. It is the Homer effect. And this is what I refer to as, like, the thing that people hone in on will always become the center of the show. And I always think, or will become, they aim to make it funnier, like Homer Simpson, Joey Tribbiani in Friends. You see it a lot. Like, all of a sudden, like, characters shifting to the center, and often finding that they don't want to do that because they worked as a side character and don't work as a main, whatever. But you are totally right. However, I would counter your point, because you do get this fight with Anguirus, and it's awful. And honestly, the choreography is it's basically two people that can't see in the costume, like, pushing and slapping each other. Like, it looks, and having watched some of the later ones that are quite campy and cheesy and stuff, like, versus Godzilla or Megadon and all those kinds of things, like, and Mothra, I'm like, oh, okay, they look all right. This is just slapdash. But even, like, the film's just an hour and a half. I think, like, 94 minutes or something like that. However, you then have, like, Godzilla turning up. He spends a lot of time just wandering around an iceberg island, not doing much. You have this one fight with Anguirus that he sort of makes landfall for a bit. That's about it. But you have, like, long portions of the film. Either, like, there's literally portions. I was going to time one point. Portions of pilots looking at the sea, because that's what the job is. I want to talk about that because I was fascinated by that. Then they literally go for a business dinner, like, that lasts like 10 minutes. There's a whole scene in a dance club. Like, if you were to take up, like, of the 90 minutes, 50, if not more than that, 60 doesn't have Godzilla in it at all.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know that that's that different from the first movie, but the first movie, you cared about it.
Yes,
I mean, the first movie pulls you in. Yeah, I mean, there's really the only thing that I feel any kind of connection to is the pilot and his girlfriend manning the radio, and that's okay. But there's no chemistry there, right? No. You don't care. It's just, this is my duty as a woman, and this is my duty as a pilot, and that's really all their relationship comes down to. I mean, the closest thing to any sort of humanity are the two women sort of giggling at each other and talking to each other on the radio and saying, you're not supposed to say that over the radio. You're making personal comments. I mean, that's as close as we get in this entire film to anything representing character.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is, they give a guy, and this is the 50s, so I you go, it's fine. But they have a character they nickname Mr. Groom, and basically the joke is that, like, he hasn't got a girlfriend or a woman lined up, and so he's basically, and then they make jokes about him using his plane to fly over Osaka and look one. And I get that it's a joke and stuff, but, like, yeah, it's like you say, they try to have sort of like comedy interactions. And I don't know, the acting's wooden and the delivery, it feels like they're all sort of really uncomfortable with each other. This feels like a rehearsal a lot of times, is how I sort of felt. So yeah, I don't know. Just the human interaction, the human part of it, never grabs me.
That's true. I mean, I would be able to forgive that. I mean, I'm a lot less concerned with character than I mean, I am, but I'm less attached to like likable characters. I'm less attached to, like feeling an organic connection, with characters, than other people seem to be. But I would be able to forgive a lot of this stuff if there were any sense of like visual poetry to this. I mean, so often you see these shots and you think, why did they decide to put the camera there?
Yeah.
What is being communicated by this? It's as if, I mean, you mentioned the sort of like dress rehearsal element. I mean, it seems as if none of these shots are composed visually.
No.
We're just being presented with information.
They are composed efficiently. In many cases, it's like, right, if I stick the camera here, I got this, I can get this much coverage. I don't have to do 2 shots, I can do 1. Is how it often feels.
We don't have to move the camera as much.
Yeah, I haven't got to do it. I haven't got to do it like go and do a dolly shot, or I haven't got to do a so none of that. I can just sit because it's all static. A lot of it is very static.
Yeah.
As you said, and so it makes it very flat. Like, there's no movement of the camera, so it often feels like that. They've gone, right, if I stick it in the corner here, I've got the best view of the entire room, and then most of the shot is going to take place in the right hand corner. Like, you're gonna have extras, but majority is gonna be over there. Okay, well, why not do like a mid shot and zoom in on those people when they're talking? Like, yeah, there's several occasions where I was just like, this just feels like the ease of just placing a camera somewhere, just so they can go, right, take 2, take 3. They haven't got a reset. They're just gonna carry on. So yeah, it does. It feels very weirdly flat in that way. And the other thing as well, I got a little. In fact, there were 2 things about the ending. We'll get to the ending, but the 2 pilots as well. We mentioned they sort of seem to become sort of like your hero characters, and sort of like your protagonists, but they never feel like that they're heroes to be sort of like that. I don't know. There's an expectation of them being sort of like, mavericks or rogues or something, where they're like, the reason they're flying for, and maybe this is just a Western thing, like the reason the main character's flying for a fishing company rather than this other thing is because he's such a anti-authoritarian, he can't get on with the brass, and so he ends up working for this fishing firm. And okay, there's none of that. Like they're not given any character, and even like tropes or cliches, they don't get anything, and so they become a bit like redundant as characters. And they also get replaced, and this is what I'm saying about the ending. Like they literally get replaced when they bring in the Air Force.
Yeah,
which
so
bizarre.
I mean, certainly undermines the sense of sacrifice.
Yeah.
I mean, seeing the reaction to his the girlfriend or whatever, I mean, provides a moment of sort of character, a moment of sort of but it's a brief moment, and then everybody has a sort of like, right, stiff upper lip, we're Japanese, carry on, we're fighting Godzilla, no time for mourning. Right, and that's about as close as we get. I mean, and you're right, I mean, it's just very flat. The characters are very flat, and I mean, we're lucky if we get like a little joke here and there that isn't funny, that at least shows like, right, they're not all totally serious all the time. That's about as close as we get to characters in this film.
Well, they even set up what we have found to be a trope of 50s sci-fi, which is carried on in many cases, but this thing of having the love interest be the daughter of the boss or the man in charge.
Yes.
And so again, I was like, okay, well, that's clearly going to play a part in sort of, keeping the love interest separated at one point. Nope. Like him being her father, like, makes no difference to this plot at all. And I was at the end, I was so expecting something where he's sort of like, I'm your father and I will protect you, and so you are not going to go to a psycho, whatever it is. But like, there was none of that. It's just sort of like, yeah. I could be. You could have just been a boss.
Yeah. No, I mean that's a very good point, and that is a big trope, especially of like disaster movies, right? A way to link the characters together to get some of this characterization done. But this movie is not interested in any of that. It's not interested. I wonder, like what is this movie interested in, right? I mean, you called it a cash grab. I mean, the most important thing is that Ishiro Honda, who directed the first film and he directed most of the early Godzilla stuff, is not the director of this, right? He directed the first one and then stepped away. He was working on another film, and so Toho gave it to somebody else who obviously does not understand what he's doing. So I wonder what is here. And so often watching this, I thought, what are they doing again?
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, right. There's that other monster, and they're scared of Godzilla, but he's also fighting the other monster, and it's like, right, is he an ally? What's going on? Oh yeah, now they're chased together. But you sort of have to stop and say, right, what's going on again?
Yeah. Oh
Does
yeah.
it really matter?
Repeatedly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there are scenes when, I think the characters are distinctive enough. Throughout, I'm like, oh, I know. I don't. I may not remember your name, but like, I know who you are. I know who you are. I know who you are. So I'm able to follow them through the plot. But I had exactly the same thing when I'm watching it, and like, I'm reading all the subtitles. But there were still scenes where I'm going like, I must have missed something, because at the moment I have no clue like what the point of this bit is. Like, and there were a couple of occasions where I wound back, like you go, oh no, it's just I'm just not grasping something, or through that like workman kind of directing, they're just like, yeah, we're going from one scene to the next. There's no flow or anything like that.
There isn't even a traditional narrative structure, right? I mean, it's just like, right, there's another monster, there's an attack. Right now, we're going to pursue Godzilla. I mean, it doesn't even do a good job of like communicating these pivots in the narrative. It's just sort of like, right now we've got a dinner. Now we're going to go kill Godzilla, but they don't even say exactly what they're doing.
Well, the dinner, I was really confused by the whole dinner scene. So they go to a restaurant, and there are two sort of rooms set up. There's a small group, which is, so the two protagonists sort of, they're pilots for this fishing firm, and they meet some old college friends, and so they go for dinner. They seem to be really rude to the woman who is the love interest of the main character. But then there's this other room where all the sort of like the bosses and stuff have sort of like met for this fishing firm that run this fishing firm and are having dinner there, and they're just sort of like, they're all singing and like they're drunk and they're singing along and stuff. Okay, cool. But like you say, it doesn't. I was going like, aren't you all worried that Godzilla's still out there? Like, none of this is sort of like, no one. And again, I think maybe I'm just so used to hearing lines of like, they can't stop us living our lives. Well, I hear it in the news all the time. Can't stop us living our lives, and so we're going to have this meal and we're going to have fun regardless. Like, I'm not stopping for Godzilla, whatever it is. There's not. They just sort of go to dinner. Like, everyone's on board with it. It's bizarre.
Right, and then they rush away. But you're right. I mean, there's no sense of connection to the narrative, right? It's just, yeah, here's a scene.
There's almost like there's two stories here. Like, there's the story of, like, say, of Godzilla and Anguirus, and then obviously Godzilla on his own. And then there's also this sort of like, I think there's this Japanese melodrama about these young lovers working for a fishing company. And they were like, we can't. Maybe Toho were just like, we can't afford two films. Let's make one film and just combine them together. I don't know. It's weird.
I don't know either, but neither of those movies is really satisfying or fleshed out. No. I mean, you're right. I mean, in a sense, there these multiple sort of things going on. I mean, it does feel like more traditional to the sort of disaster movie genre in that sense, right?
Mm.
We're going to follow these people through, and of course there's the tragic death, right? Except there's plenty of pilots. I
Yeah.
mean, mostly what we see him doing is flying over empty ocean, searching for something. And okay, so I guess I'm glad he found Godzilla. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to care about anything in this movie.
No, I agree. Like I came out of this film sort of a bit like, oh, okay, that was a Godzilla film.
Yeah.
And I haven't watched them all, but I've watched a fair few, and I do think this is the one I care the least about. It also there's some things I want to have on, but I actually think you mentioned there that there was a big gap between this one and the next one.
7 years.
Yeah, and the next one though
Mm-hmm.
isn't a new monster, isn't sort of a one of the ones we now know as being a Godzilla creation. It's Godzilla versus King Kong.
Actually, it's King Kong versus Godzilla.
King,
King Kong gets the top billing.
he does. You are
Yeah.
right. And so yeah, in that, you realize you're like, oh, okay. They weren't 100% sure that Godzilla had legs, and I honestly think I don't know what the take was on this. I don't know what the reception was to this, but it feels like this was one that hit the cinema and everyone went, oh yeah, no, this isn't the same as the first one. I don't like it. And so I can imagine this was a bit of a flop. Especially if it took 7 years for the next one, and it's such a departure for the next one. Like the camp is introduced.
Yeah.
The human story is much better played out. It's not a great film. It's fun, but it's it's interesting.
I mean that sort of evolution of Godzilla is fascinating. Apparently Godzilla Raids Again did okay. It generated 8.3 million tickets, which
Wow.
in 55 in Japan seems pretty reasonable.
Mm.
It was the 10th highest grossing Japanese release for that year. It did not do as well as the first one. But, the first one is basically a ripoff of an American movie. It's not, original. And it was not clear that Godzilla was going to be a thing. And, you have like, later on we think of them as part of the Godzilla universe, if you will, like Rodan. Well, instead of, I think Rodan is like 56. So they keep making these Gojira movies, but instead of Godzilla 3, they make a Rodan movie, right? And then
is Godzilla in Rodan? I think it's just no, because there's a Mothra. Yeah, there's a Mothra movie as well, isn't there? She's playing Mothra.
61. So I mean, those were between Godzilla Raids Again and King Kong versus Godzilla. So clearly, like, Godzilla was just one of a bunch of monsters that they were making, and after Godzilla Raids Again, they don't know where to take this, and they try out these other guys, and then they bring back Godzilla, with secondary billing to the Japanese version of King Kong, and then it's Mothra versus Godzilla, right? Again, Mothra gets the top billing, and Toho is deciding to combine monsters, right? From those other films. And then after that, basically, like, Godzilla is sort of much more, I think Rodan shows up in the next one, and, but Godzilla becomes much more the franchise. Right, but this is clearly like just the second film. It's like King Kong, or the first two Frankensteins, or where this is that second film that goes with that first one, but then that third one is later, or very different. This is just that follow up that is kind of a piece, but in this case, the difference is shocking.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, what you talked about before about the human element, And about in the first one, like you say, you're right. There's a whole lot of human story in there, and again, it's got that sort of like there's the young couple, and one of them's dad is a scientist, and blah blah blah. But the ending has tension. Like the ending is all about that thing of like the oxygen destroyer is like almost like a last ditch effort. Like they have to stop Godzilla. It builds to a real sort of like crescendo of suspense. It works. In this one, like Godzilla goes home to this island that's got snow on it. It's like this iceberg thing, and then there's just like this mission of basically bombing it and getting him trapped in an avalanche. And all I can think of is like, even this film shows he has atomic breath that basically heats things up and destroys things. How is snow going to do anything? Like it's the dumbest ending. But it's also, as you said, sort of because it's so flat. Godzilla just sort of stands there for the most part.
Yes.
And just gets bombed on, and I'm just like, no, run, move, use your tail, use something. Like it's so, I don't know, just sort of like flat. Because nothing really happens. It's bizarre choices.
And it looks like a guy in a suit.
Yeah.
I mean, you can pull out and show Godzilla from a distance, and especially at night, it looks pretty good. It looked pretty good in the first one.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously now you've got to see him fighting another guy in a suit. There are some shots that look better than others. There's some shots that look pretty bad. But every time they show him, I'm like, that's a guy standing in a crate, in a valley,
yeah,
whatever. And then the snow falls on him. And it's the same thing as like when you see fire, you've pointed out like the fire is never in scale. It's like those flames are 10 stories high, flipping around like with the same rapidity of a close-up of fire because it's a small fire. The same thing is true of like the boulders that fall on Godzilla. I mean, he's obviously like in some sort of man-sized canyon that's maybe like 30 feet high, 20 feet high, something like that. And these like rocks of ice and snow fall on him, and they are very clearly like very small pieces of ice. Ice doesn't fall in enormous boulders the size of bigger than cars, the size of small buildings or something. And everything looks wrong.
Yeah.
And that's a very good point about the fire. Like, his fire, atomic breath, like he doesn't do anything. It's so static. And he waits like right underneath this, these areas where, literally the best, most effective thing that they do. Oh God, this is so stupid. Remember when they like have the planes and they say like, oh, this is going to be a very difficult strafing maneuver. You don't need to do that maneuver. Like, bomb the area around Godzilla. The most effective thing that happens to hurt Godzilla is the main character getting hit and crashing, causing an avalanche. Like, literally, that is the most effective thing that happens.
Yeah. It's. I was sat sort of like watching this ending. I'm like, this is supposed to be the villain of the beast. Like, Godzilla's still supposed to be, and he is so ineffective. But I'm like, if I was halfway through this, I'd be like, just stop. Like, he doesn't seem to do anything. Like, he doesn't seem to care. Like, I don't know. It's bizarre watching it. The thing I would say as well is, they say about the pulling up to get out of the cliff, up the cliff face, is the same ending. That's the same ending that they gave to not Mission Impossible. Sorry, Top Gun 2. It's literally the same ending as Top Gun 2. So I was just like, huh, that seems to be a thing. Like, fair enough.
Well, in fairness, I mean, okay, you mentioned that Top Gun Maverick, which I haven't seen, whatever, is, nobody ever needs to see a Tom Cruise movie, okay? But you mentioned how it's sort of like a Star Wars ripoff. To be fair, that is the end of Star Wars.
Yeah.
And what was I watching? I was watching something else where I pointed this out, and I was like, this is the trench. Oh, it was just the most recent episode of the Orville. It was
Yes.
filled
Yeah.
with, and it has another trench thing like this. And I'm always like, it's even worse with the Death Star. Like, you're in space, right? You can't go overhead, right?
Yeah.
You don't need to go into this trench. None of this makes any sense. And here, it's the same thing. Drop some bombs on this. There's no need to literally fly past Godzilla and then steer up this cliff, and then drop bombs. I mean,
Well, it's the fact that they choose to use fighter jets when they could. You're right. They could have used a bomber, like a high altitude bomber, and they had them. I mean, it wasn't sort of high altitude like they do now, but like, yeah, literally just and then drop a bunch of bombs, come back, do it again. Like, I don't know. Yeah, the ending just feels again so underthought and badly planned that you just sort of like, oh, okay, that's the ending that we're supposed to get. All right, fair enough. I
like your point about how he's the villain of the piece, and he just sort of stands there, like, for as much as I trash the Marvel movies, and they have very bad villains that are none of them which are memorable. Having said that, they know to at least go through the motions of like, oh, he's a badass, and this is going to be a tough fight. That's going to be 30 minutes of boredom, but at least it's going to be a tough fight. Here, I mean, imagine if I'm Dr. Doom, the world will tremble. Now I will stand here for 15 minutes.
Yeah. Well, that's what it's like. Yeah, the whole fight with Anguirus, it's like, surely that's supposed to show you how tough he is, for some reason. And then, like you say, later on, he just sort of stands there, and you're just like, what? Yeah, it's just. This one is like it feels like a cash grab because they've just gone bang Godzilla's name on it. It's clearly going to do well. We'll make a film. And
I mean, in fairness, things that I liked, I did like in the fight with Anguirus, how they're sort of like on a dock, and and you're like, oh, that dock's going to get smashed, and it does get smashed. But yeah, obviously it's like balsa wood, and I mean, you can sort of see it doesn't quite respond the way it should, but they are smashing through buildings and whatnot, and stuff's on fire, and I thought that was fun. I mean, it's about a minute, and then Godzilla, having finally sort of gotten lucky and defeated Anguirus, he's like, I'm gonna cement this victory and burn him with my atomic breath, and he's totally immune to the fact that, oh yeah, there's a city around you, and so his breath just sets this dead monster on fire. But the monster's going to return, by the way. But sets the monster on fire, but also sets the whole city on fire. And I thought, well, that was good, so I sort of liked that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the fight with Anguirus isn't a joke, and said it was like two guys who can't see sort of slapping each other, and it does come across that. But one of the things I would say, actually, in like you say, that's positive, it's like, and I think a lot of films in this era seem to get it right. The miniature work, I just really enjoy it. Like they have like tanks rolling up and like trucks with missiles on the back. The prisoner van that crashes, that causes the fire at the dock and stuff, is a miniature shot. Now, it's not perfect, but it works. It works well. And they've got several shots of jets and planes and stuff that are miniature. And I'm like, yeah, cool. That all works. That's fine. Your miniature work is solid. Well done.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's solid. I don't mind it.
I'm looking to give positives.
I know. Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I found myself with the jets, which are clearly, just wobbling on threads. And I thought, it made me think of, I mean, admittedly, which is much later, it made me think of Thunderbirds, and I thought like, okay, that's not a good thing, it looks cheap. And I mean, I kind of had a mixed review of those tanks. Like, I thought they look good. It's good miniature work, but they're just sort of like rolling very freely. And, I mean, they're obviously just on wheels and not on treads, and it looks off.
Yes.
And I think, all of it, I mean, the planes look really off to me. Yeah, but I mean, I do like seeing the miniatures, right? I mean, it's the same like, Thunderbirds, like, oh, cool puppets, right? Like, look at how these were done. There is just a fun to seeing the miniature work.
Yes.
So I agree with you on that.
It's a bit like, when you see stop motion, I'm always a bit like, oh, cool, I like stop motion. Even when it's not done 100% well, it's like, yeah, but it's still a good skill, and it always looks, I think I enjoy seeing it.
Yeah.
Let's quickly talk about Godzilla's. You see, it looks like a guy in a suit. In the first one, like you said, it's often clouded in sort of shadow, and it's kept at a distance, and you see different bits and pieces. But in general, Godzilla looks pretty good, I think. In this one, he sort of has like he reminded me of there's a close up where he sort of looks round at the city and it's on fire. And I could not get past the fact he looked like Cookie Monster. Like he has like two goggly eyes, and then sort of like, he's got like a bobbly head and stuff. But I was like, I can't get past the fact that it's sort of like, and they sort of recontextualized this design of Godzilla for Shin Godzilla.
Mm-hmm.
Like the sort of like weirdly boggly eyes and that sort of like massive bump skin. But at least with Shin, it's sort of like it's obviously done with computer animation. He's made much bigger, and it kind of works. But you said about the miniatures being off. Like it's when his mouth opens for him to roar, it's clear like his bottom jaw's just on a hinge.
Yeah.
And his teeth don't quite match up and all this other stuff. And so again, it just looks kind of off.
Yeah.
And so that I couldn't get past that as well. I was like, okay, there's some poor dude in a suit, but it looks everything on this just looks cheap or looks messy.
Yeah, I mean, nothing really quite works. I mean, you mentioned about the fight with Anguirus not looking very convincing, and a lot of people have complained about that. I sort of, having grown up with dogs and sort of seen dogs roughhousing, it reminded me of kind of like two dogs roughhousing that might wind up hurting each other, but might also be kind of scrapping and playing a little.
Yeah.
Sort of like circling. They're not really going for the kill. They're just kind of like, swiping at each other a little. But you mentioned like especially these close-up shots, and it's these headshots that really, really are horrible.
Yes.
Is that headshot of Godzilla that you mentioned? I was so irritated by the headshot of Anguirus, and they seem to like. I don't think they're really reusing it, but it's this like movement that he does of just kind of like shaking his head left and right.
Oh, yeah. He rotates his head round.
Yeah, as if like, what is that? Like, I mean, I've seen animals make weird gestures where it's like, oh, is that evolutionarily imprinted, or like this makes sense to that animal, even though it's a sort of weird thing. It is not convincing at all. It does not look threatening. It looks like he's confused. It looks like, like it is so bizarre, and it looks cheap. I don't know. I can't say enough about how irritated at that little head move I was.
No, I agree, because it's such a weird, like I say, almost like out of context. Like if it was in reaction to something, you'd be like, oh, okay, like you said, like I can see it as being an animal reacting to something. But he's not.
Sometimes it's in reaction. He makes it in reaction to other different contexts. Sometimes it's reaction to Godzilla threatening him, or like grabbing him, biting him, and then you cut to his face, and he's like, rotating his head, and he'll do it like twice.
Yes.
And it's like, do you think that's threatening? Like, are we supposed to think that looks scary? It's so bizarre.
It's just bizarre. I'm just looking at images, and that one of those just came up. Of Anguirus doing that thing, and I'm just like, it's just so bizarre. It's clear
it does seem like it's ready for GIF, like
I'm
to
sure
be posted on Twitter,
Yeah.
like I don't understand what you're saying, and I should have some reaction, but this is the
Yeah.
reaction of like inscrutable reaction, I guess.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, and that's the thing. I don't know. I'm just looking at images. It is. They're just cheap and, like you say, just bizarre. And again, like you say, he defeats Angus pretty handily as well. Like it's not like it's a hard fought battle. Like it sort of lasts for a bit, and then he just batters him, and you're like, oh, all right. I never feel like, yes, all right, he's king of monsters, brilliant.
Yeah.
What was the point? What instigated the fight? Because they're already fighting at one point. The way they describe it, one of the professors, I have no evidence for this. He says, "Oh, Anguirus must have attacked him from behind," and you're like, right? How have you got that? Because when the two pilots see them, they're already fighting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think they were fighting earlier, and then the flares. There's that whole thing with the flares that goes on endlessly, and that seem very unconnected to the planes flying overhead. This pattern of lights in the sky, that was used to distract Godzilla from the city, and then Godzilla turns around when he's like, "Some convicts have started a fire. See, I'd better go over there." And then they say, "Oh, look, Anguirus is coming up behind him. He must have been attracted to the flares." So like the flares that backfired, they did work, but they also had the effect of luring the other monster in the area, while also luring Godzilla away.
Yeah, it's all very like nonsensical. Really, is the problem. It sort of just doesn't make. But it makes me. I want to go back to. It's making me think about this idea of franchises or sort of like a series of films. And just as we've been talking, obviously we said like there was Rodan and Mothra, and then Godzilla makes its return in 1962 against King Kong, and it's a very different tone. It's in color. They're going for something slightly different. It's open to a bit more humor and that sort of thing. And it makes me feel like there's this thing of like when franchises change tact or change direction to reinvent themselves, or like characters do. And it's the same thing of like the two I think of would be like the Fast and the Furious, when like Fast 5 come out and all of a sudden it's like, oh no, we're now going for this kind of different film. Like it was about racing cars, now it's about international heists and all this other stuff. And also like with James Bond, I think of this, I think of this idea when they're like, well, we've done the gritty Bond or we've done the silly Bond, now we're going to do something else. And it sort of feels
about like the reboot Bond from
when they reboot things, it feels a bit like that when these franchises sometimes go away and they have to. And Batman's the same. When they'll go, oh, we're going to bring back we can't have the same as the last time. What are we going to do to rejuvenate them? I can imagine those conversations taking place.
I guess. I mean, I just think like in the case of Bond, like the early Bonds are all over the map in terms of genre, right? You follow like From Russia with Love with like Goldfinger, right?
Yeah.
Those are not the same universe.
No.
One is happy to be campy, fun. The other is like basically dead serious spy Bond before the recent films. So in fairness, I think Bond kind of like always did that. But what it makes me think of is like these, and we've talked about it, like these franchises that sort of maybe the Fast and the Furious is more like that. I haven't seen any of those movies all the way through because I don't hate myself.
You're missing out there, Julian. Oh, that's a podcast in itself, that is.
Yeah. Well, maybe for 20th Century Geek, that we could do a special episode of, Julian bites the bullet and, how much does he want to kill himself by the end of the entire series? Yeah, but I'm thinking more along the lines of like, Rocky, Alien does this. You made that argument about like the worst or most hated element becomes the main thing, like with Homer. Um,
Yeah.
it's also like, these franchises become parodies of themselves, right? So like Godzilla in 54, he's a metaphor. He's shot, in smoke. He's shot like it's a Kurosawa film, right? I mean, he's shot with, you can see that could be filming next to, Seven Samurai or something. There's an artfulness in the presentation.
Yes.
He's not just, a guy in a suit. I mean, it's like the Die Hard movies, right? I mean, he's a guy. It's very carefully put together in the first one. Fast forward a few movies, and he's just, your typical ninja, a guy who can't be hurt, who's just a badass, yet another badass. I mean, basically, that's the evolution that we got in these two Godzilla movies, and it happened over, one movie, as opposed to like a set of 4 sequels.
Yeah, and that's the weird thing of it, is that thing, as you say, is sort of like the pivot of it is usually, those pivots are usually happen because of for example, let's stick with Fast and Furious, like dropping off returns. They got to the 4th one, and they were like, okay, we've pretty much done everything we can do with this format of, car racing being used to do something else. Right, we've got to up the ante. You change tact. Harry Potter's another good example. Like the first 2 films, they're written and directed by Chris Columbus. This is sort of not happy, but like they have a much more sort of youthful tone. There's sort of like, there's a richness to them. And then all of a sudden, the 3rd one is Aaron Carrion, the sort of the Spanish director, and it's all of a sudden it's like all angular, and there's more shadows, like there's these horror elements are creeping into it, and you can sort of go, oh, that's because we expect the audience is getting older. We can't keep being kiddie films, so we've got to try and grow up with them a little bit. And so I do find that, but it happens over time, and usually because of a consequence. This has had 1 film, and then they've just gone, yeah, that was a good one, but now this is this different Godzilla. We'll play it differently.
Yeah, and it's interesting also how it's so different, but it's also like a transition to we're just gonna have guys in suits and the more campiness, right?
Yeah.
Like it's still set in a realistic world, just horribly written,
Yeah.
And sort of is introducing the first other monster. I mean, it's introducing 2 new monsters, right? Because Godzilla is another guy. Just neither of them really have any origin. I mean, in that sense, it's clearly getting into just the guys in suits fighting.
Yeah.
But it still wants to be set in a realistic world. It's just doing a piss poor job of it.
Well, yeah. I mean, what you say about, we talk about him being the villain, and like you say, a guy in a suit. What happened to the suit from the first film?
I don't know. I mean, is it?
I've no idea, because I was thinking, watching this, going, oh, they've clearly made a new suit, but like it was probably like a year, less than a year ago that this was being used. So why can't you rock that out? Like, it must have been destroyed, I suppose, or something. They weren't expecting to make a sequel. I don't know, but it feels weird to be making a new suit when in those days. So there's definitely that part that was weirding me out.
Well, so apparently it is a new suit. It was sculpted, but one of the key things they wanted, and this kind of makes sense, is that the suit had to be made of lighter materials so that they could do those fight scenes, right?
Right.
So the fight scenes, as a consequence, the suit kind of looks like crap because it's got to be cloth and sort of, more lightweight. And then, but the fight scenes also look like crap because you can't really see through the suit.
Yeah.
And so you're just like having actors swing some, appendage at each other.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I would say is this, and this is where it gets to later on, is akin to like professional wrestling. And in fact, 62, the Kong versus Godzilla is exactly that. Like it follows it's like a precursor to a feud. Like it starts off, and they'll have there'll be a couple of matches, or there'll be an intervention where there's no clear winner, or there might be, but it was due to the intervention, like somebody else got involved or something, and it all leads up to the final confrontation, and that's the point. Like that's the climax, isn't it? Like you're supposed to be in suspense for this showdown at the end, and that it starts to work. I'm sure that's what a lot of them are like. Even if you watch like the modern monster universe, like the most recent one, which was a couple of years ago, was Godzilla versus King Kong.
Yeah.
Does exactly that. Like it builds up to, you have a couple of confrontations, one wins a bit, the other one wins a bit, but it's not clear cut, and then they have the big fight at the end. That's the point. It's quite straightforward. But like you said, with this one doesn't follow a standard structure. There's one fight about a third of the way through it, and then large stretches of human things. And at no point do I really feel like Godzilla is a major threat. Like there was one point, obviously, like you say, where he sort of destroys part of Osaka, and they've evacuated those areas, and they go back to the fishing offices, and that's where the cannery was, and there's all this other stuff. You go, oh, that's terrible. But it never feels like that's what I'm never going like, oh my god, that's terrible. This is horrendous. I can see why you're going after Godzilla. I'm like it's not your own fault. Like like he was leaving, and when they have the confrontation, it's not like he's already had a fight with humans. Do you know what I mean? There's no been set up confrontation.
They draw him back.
Yeah, it's a real.
But even then, they could show like the human toll of this devastation.
Yes, and
they do in the first one.
Yeah,
I mean,
they do.
it's like I don't think Gone with the Wind is a very good movie, but it's famous for that pan scene of showing all the dead. There's a version of that in Godzilla 54.
Yes.
I mean, we see that, and we were both affected by that. There's nothing like that. Instead, what we get here is like shots of Osaka with rear projection flames over the background, so you can clearly see nothing's burning in the foreground. That's as close as we get to showing the human toll.
Yeah,
that's what I mean. Not good.
No, there's no heart to this. You never feel that impact. So when they go after Godzilla, I'm a bit like, oh, your own fault. So like, leave him alone. So yeah, I don't know. It all feels very sort of just silly and flat.
It's a bit like somebody in Yellowstone, saying like, we're very worried about this bear. The bear is clearly not interested in them leaving. Then they like throw some cheese out the window.
Yeah.
The bear comes over and menaces them.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the movie is, let's go hunt and kill that bear who's now left humans alone.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not Jaws, is it? I mean, this isn't Jaws where they're constantly having those attacks and they're going to kill off the shark. Yeah, this is sort of like where the Godzilla, like you said, is almost like Lovecraftian or Cthulhu or whatever, where it's like, I've got no interest in you. You just happen to be there. Like, it's not intentional. At least with the first one, like he reaches land and starts moving across Tokyo and stuff. Like, there's a level of destruction to it that is engaged upon. Like he's not doing it because he hates them, but like he ends up sort of like picking victims and stuff. Like, I don't know. Yeah, this is bizarre. Everything about this film feels so. I don't know. It's just like I say, so flat and so sort of like you get to the end and it's so unsatisfying. Now, I watched the Japanese version of this online, and I did find the English or the American version. So much like happened with the original. They obviously re-edited it and inserted American actors and stuff. They did the same with Godzilla Raids Again, and I've not watched it. However, there's a part of me that does fancy watching it. Like, how have they made it any different? To see if they did anything to try and, I don't know, add some depth or anything to it. I don't know what the difference is. Yeah,
I don't know. Yeah, I haven't seen. I have not seen the American version of the original, which is known as Godzilla King of Monsters. I
Mm.
have not seen, and I have not seen the American version of this either.
No, I'm not sure if they're worth seeing, but I'll be curious just to be like, oh, okay, that's what they did. You know, they've inserted an actor just talking to some people, or is he off the side having his own adventure, or do they completely replace the human element? I don't know. It's sort of
Well, according to Wikipedia, the American adaptation produced a 129-page script with instructions to the editor of where the Japanese footage was to be used. They changed Godzilla and Anguirus to dinosaurs, with Godzilla identified as a female Tyrannosaurus. All shots of Godzilla using his atomic breath were eliminated to be replaced with new footage of Godzilla swiping his claws at jets. They added more panic, disaster, military mobilization scenes. I mean, they said the blackout was caused by the monsters destroying a power plant instead of,
so.
a deliberate thing. So, I mean, a wholesale rewrite.
It sounds a little bit like they're having the same conversation that you and I are having, where they have gone, and this is awful to say because I don't want to be trashing this film, but let's say there's very little salvageable here. We need to be just doing our own thing. Because the first one is an insertion, like there's an American actor inserted into the Japanese film. Like you said, it sounds like the American adaptation is a complete redo, which is fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I mean, it looks like they've done their best to use most of the footage, but they seem more free to say like, right, we can edit this to change the plot.
Yeah.
I mean, we can change. You change a line of dialogue, and suddenly, something's very different.
I'm kind of curious. I might have to watch it now just to see what it's like. But yeah, it's interesting. So, but I haven't seen it, so I can't comment on it. But all in all, I'm trying to get back. The thing is, I'm going through this film, and it's one of the few films that we have covered where I get to a point, I'm like, well, there's no great theme to talk about. There's nothing for us to anchor on around sort of like, politics or themes or war or anything about that. The film itself is incredibly flat and has no punch to it. So I can't, get excited about anything like that. It's a bizarre sort of like almost like a bizarre like non-entity of a film. Like I watched it, and whilst I was watching parts of it, I was like, oh, all right, that's kind of good. But like you say, I watched it this morning, and even to this point, I'm like, yeah, there's parts of the plot that I'm pretty sure I couldn't tell you what happened.
Yeah, I had the same problem. I watched it days ago. I'm rarely that far ahead, and I like to have things sort of fresh in my mind. But I was on HBO Max, and I saw it on HBO Max, and I thought, right, I'll get. I don't know what to watch tonight. I'll get started on this, right? And in preparing for the show, I thought I've really got to review this plot because I don't remember anything.
Yeah,
I remember shots of planes crashing into snowbanks. I don't really remember that much else.
No, it's very
unsatisfying.
Yeah, low impact. Like there's very little to take away from this film. Which is why I think, like you say, I'm taking it. It's like because this came a year after. Like we've gone from 54 to 55, and then you get to 62. And so like that 7 years is a long time in cinema. Like, you think about like you said about Bond, like when Bond hits his stride, it's like two years max between some of those early films. Like they were banging them out. And so yeah, this feels like I don't know. It's an interesting one. It's sort of watching this and going like, okay, that's why this didn't go any further because it just didn't. It did fine, but I don't know. It seems very forgettable.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like. I mean, obviously this did fine. It did not as well as the first one, but there's something to be said for watching something and say it has not necessarily artistic energy, but it has an idea behind it. There's a way you can imagine continuing this. it's hard to imagine watching Godzilla Raids again and thinking, I want a third installment of this.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And
Interestingly, go ahead.
I was going to say, but what you said, I think that's the point Toho made. I think they were just like, there's no desire for this. We're not hearing anyone calling for it, so we're not going to bother doing it.
If you liked Godzilla, we have this other product for you.
Yeah.
Once you have that, you know, it's like having too much candy, you know.
Yes.
The first one was an actual meal. The second one is just candy and it's really sour candy. And by the time you're done with it, your stomach will be sick. You won't want it anymore. Interestingly, that American version was titled Gigantus, the Fire Monster.
Really?
It was explicitly not Godzilla, and that was because they were like, "Look, we killed Godzilla in the first movie. Let's just call this something else because it can't be Godzilla." So it's not even a Godzilla movie in the States. It was Gigantus, the Fire Monster, as
Interesting.
it should, which was double bill with Teenagers from Outer Space. Right.
Fair enough. Yeah, that's it. It becomes a B movie, doesn't it? That's the thing. It becomes a B movie flick, monster flick. That's all it is.
Yeah, it is sad. I mean, it's sad because, I think we both like the original Godzilla so much.
Mm.
And I was really impressed with it. And, I'm glad to see this. You've seen more of the Godzilla films than I have. But, I am shocked by... I can't imagine any idiot watching Godzilla and making this movie as the sequel. It's just how dumb do you have to be?
It's one of those weird drop-offs of a sequel. We talk about changing like pivot, and often you get that thing of another. There are reasons for it. I mean, that we talk about change of characters. I think of Friday the 13th. Spoilers for a film that is 40 years old, 42 years old. But in the first one, it's clear, it's not Jason that's doing all the killing. Sorry. And it's Jason Voorhees is introduced as the villain in the second one. And then, so they pivot and those films become a different animal because of that. It feels like that sort of thing, isn't it? But like, there's a sort of like the first one, and then you're like, wait, we're going to do something different for the second one. We're going to really introduce something different. Yeah, I don't know. These pivots with these sequels, it's bizarre. It's like a real sort of. I don't want to make another comparison, like making The Godfather and then making, I don't know what's that one with Jimmy Blue Eyes with Hugh Grant in. That's sort of like.
Well, I was thinking of like Hitman, like The Godfather Part 2 is just like it's really fun to assassinate people. Yeah,
it's just Al Pacino. It's not Al Pacino. It's an Al Pacino impersonator going around, just like you say, just playing really sort of like really broad Italian stereotypes and whacking people. That's the second film. I'm going, it's good fun. I mean, it's a silly film, but like. Yeah, I'm not sure what happened to the whole story of Michael Corleone sort of like descent to evil. You're like, but he clearly had fun in the second one,
Yeah, and there is, I don't know, I increasingly these days have this feeling, like, every once in a while I watch movies that I am not pleased with, and I'm talking about contemporary movies, and I think that. It's as if people have watched these movies that they're influenced by, but not seem to understand them at all.
Yes.
And so, you see sort of shots that are influenced by The Godfather, and they'll be like, yeah, it was in that badass, take the cannoli, It's like, that's not the tone at all. That's not the point, right? Of the original. Or you'll see like an homage to Apocalypse Now or something, in a movie that is like, yeah, war's cool, this is fun. No, the entire point is this is chaotic and terrible. and this does seem to be, something of that in comparison to the first Godzilla. I mean, like, obviously it's supposed to be like the first Godzilla this is horrifying.
Mm.
I mean, this is terrible. In the second one, it's like, yeah, check it out, Osaka's in flames. We've destroyed a monument.
Yeah, but not even that. But not without being good at doing that.
Yes.
It's not like I'm looking at the action and going like, yeah, the action's badass in this. Yeah, I'm not feeling the human element, but at least I get a really cool fight and I get loads of destruction. Like, at least I get a section of like Independence Day or sort of like one of those sort of like disaster. No, it's not. Like, again, I'd go back to Godzilla and be like, yeah, actually, the destruction and the fighting and stuff in that is better. Obviously has more of a weight and more theme to it, but it looks better and has more to it. It's just, yeah, there's nothing. I was trying to think if we were to have, because obviously when we get to the end of the season, we'll do like an out of 10 and we record those scores. But I listened to another podcast called Now Playing, and they just do a red and green arrow. Is it a green arrow, red
thumbs
arrow?
up, thumbs down?
Yeah, basically kind of thing. And there's 3 people, so you get that sort of broad thing. And I was thinking, they often say, I was looking for something to recommend this. Because I don't like to trash on things. Well, I obviously do, but like I was thinking, like how much we liked Godzilla. Is there something in this to recommend it? Could I say, go watch this? Now I've watched a couple of Godzilla films. I've watched, I say, not huge amounts. I've watched the versus Kong, and I've watched one more, I think, with Mothra in with Godzilla. And I've obviously watched the original and this, and then I've watched some of the later ones. I've watched the '84 one and some of the more modern ones. There's a Ghidorah one from the '90s I've seen as well. And so I've watched those, and you go, all right, this is by far the worst. Because at least those have a sort of formula where they go like you say, we're going to go batshit crazy, and we're going to have time travel and aliens, or we're going to have like Mechazilla, or we're going to have a giant moth and miniature twins that live in a jungle that control it. I'm like, cool, swing for the fences and be as weird as you want, but at least have fun with it. This film is just like so absent that there's nothing to recommend it in my book.
I agree. And in fact, I would say watch Godzilla 1954.
Yeah.
Stop there. Avoid the sequel. Jump to the stuff that's highly rated. Maybe like Destroy All Monsters, Mothra. Other stuff. But you do not need to see this. And I keep wondering, how was this a follow-up to that first one? If you watch that first one, like clearly what they're thinking is it's fun because it's a giant monster movie. So what's better than 1? 2. Right? It's not like they're not coming at this and thinking like, right, well, that was a metaphor for Hiroshima and the atomic bomb. It featured a lot of, just sort of like serious carnage and people up against the wall. Maybe Godzilla is still alive and he attacks somewhere else, right? Maybe he attacks another country and Japan has to decide, do we help that other country? I mean, there are lots of ways to continue this, but surely the least interesting is Godzilla raids again, literally. But it's not even Godzilla. We'll just bring him back, have him attack Osaka this time, and what's better than one monster 2? I mean, there doesn't seem to be anything deeper than that going on here.
No, there's not. There really isn't. I think that's one of the sort of the main problems. Like, it doesn't carry any of that thematic weight, does it? And it's not even fun. I don't mind things dropping thematic weight if they're going to be fun. That's the thing. Anyway, I think we are getting close to time, so I'm just going to say so. Any final thoughts for Godzilla Raids Again?
I mean, they should have just given Godzilla a samurai sword. I mean, at least that would have, like you said, it would have been fun.
Yeah, give him like full samurai, big hat, big like armored helmet, the works. But yeah,
Shrink him down, have him wander onto that Kurosawa set next door. It's just like, come on, man, that would be so awesome.
that's the thing with this. Like, one of the things that's interesting is because the future is just the fighting, all right? But yeah, why not have it do something interesting? Have Godzilla in the past? I mean, could be done. Could be interesting. Yeah, I think I've been quite abundantly clear about how I feel about this film. It's a real disappointment, especially because of how much I like the original. As you say, it's sort of affecting. It's very solid. This just feels like such a disappointment. I mean, this is going from the Terminator to Terminator 3. That sort of like level of like, oh shit, they really didn't know what was going on there.
No, man, you're so wrong. Terminator 3 has ideas.
That's
At least
true.
it's trying to do something, right? It has an agenda that's been thought out.
Yeah, that's
Whether
true.
it completely fails in its execution or not, it knows what it's doing.
That's a fair point. Yeah.
I mean, this compares unfavorably to T3.
Yes, that's no, yes, no doubt. Yeah, that's very true. Yes. Anyway, I think you're right. Let's wrap it up on Godzilla raids again. I don't think we're going to get much more from it. Yeah, but this may not be the end of Godzilla on Stories Out in Time and Space. There are many, many more films. We haven't even covered the fighty Godzilla that is to come, and there are others. So it would be interesting to go into that era, maybe in the future, and see one of those other Showa era sort of Godzilla films and see how it does change. Again, we'll see about that. But next, an early little win for me. We're continuing. We've done so far. We've done some early films. Now this is our first return. We've done a sequel, and now we're going to do for the next episode. We're doing an original. We did the remake, the 1986, The Fly, the David Cronenberg version. Now we're going back and we're going to be doing the 1959. It was 1958. I can't remember. The Fly with Vincent Price. So that's right. I'm getting a little bit of Vincent Price in early on this season. And so I'm looking forward to sort of talking that. Does it hold up? Is it as silly as this, or does it hold any weight? It'll be interesting to see how we feel about this film. So Julian, thank you.
1958.
1958. I was right.
Yeah, and I've never seen this.
Have you not?
No, never seen it.
I'm not going to comment. But yeah, it'll be interesting.
Well,
to talk about
we've talked about it in comparison to the remake. So
yes,
but
it has.
Yeah, and it's sort of famous.
It has a slightly different tone, but the ending is very different. But yes, but Julian, thank you very much for talking Godzilla Raids again. It's
my pleasure.
Even if the conversation has been more fun than the film, but that's always the bonus of these podcasts. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for following along. There's a couple of things to note. If you like what we're doing, let people know. Leave us a review. Go on social media, drop and just at Pod Time Space and just say how great we are. Let people know. We appreciate it. But this isn't the only content you're now going to be getting on the main feed. So if you really want to shout us out, you are getting these every other week. Us going through the films one by one through this season. The list is out there now. It's pinned to on the Twitter. Go have a look at the full listing. But in between main episodes, we are now doing Trekking Through the Twilight Zone. This has been a Patreon exclusive, and we've completed sort of the first couple of seasons on Patreon. It's all on there. So if you want to go back onto Patreon, go follow us on Patreon. That's www.patreon.com/20cgmedia. You will find we release them there weekly, but now we're going to be doing them fortnightly between the main episodes. But every other week, Julian and I take 15 to 20 minutes to talk about an episode of the Twilight Zone, the original series, the Rod Serling Twilight Zone, and we're working our way from season 1. So the first 2 episodes are on this feed. Go check them out, and there'll be more every other week. So that's been good fun, isn't it? They're good fun to do, those ones.
Yeah, it's been fantastic, and we've been doing it for a while on Patreon, and like you said, we're already done with with season 2. We've recorded those episodes. I hope that people enjoy them as much as we have. I think they're kind of a great sort of short palate cleanser. Some between these movies. Sometimes it's cool to talk about these 30-minute little short hits, and I find that it's like that bit to keep with the Japanese theme is that little bit of ginger and wasabi there, to sort of wash the sushi. But ginger specifically is the palate cleanser. But it's great fun, and I hope that people enjoy them. Fortnightly for the Americans means bi-weekly.
Yes, every 2 weeks. Yes,
right.
Every 2 weeks. Sorry. Yes.
I still have to stop and think about that. But yeah, anyway, if you like them, we're already. You want more? Hey, we got the full 2 seasons up on Patreon. Not to mention, your 30-minute thoughts, and other bonus interviews and stuff.
Create a corner that comes every quarter. So yeah, we've got loads of stuff on there. Go check out behind the scenes stuff, polls, and all kinds of things as well. So go check that out. There'll be a link down below. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And Julian, thank you very much. And we'll catch up in the next episode to talk The Fly. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you, and we'll talk to you again soon.